Until the current moment, there are great spaces of our world that are totally uncharted, unpeopled, not even a single human lives there. Deserts, mountains, remote islands, forests, vast oceans and ice giant areas at the other side of the world. No one will hear a scream, even if it lasts for 2 days. It is highly difficult to find a trace of technology or even a single phone signal reaching there. Most people call them deserted areas. Elon Musk himself, described as the Iron Man by the American media, calls them dead zones. Those dead zones are not the areas where no human lives, on the contrary, there are areas where billions of people live but are still dead in terms of technology. For a deep understanding, look at this map. This map shows the number of people who do not have internet or phone service. Moreover, a remarkable percentage of those people have never heard about the internet, that medium you see me through now. How many are those people? 10 million? 100 million in all probability? No. About 3 billion people, about 36% of the world's population, do not have internet access. Almost half of them are in India and China. It is also difficult to reach all of them by submarine cables that transmit the internet to us. As you can see in front of you, for these cables to reach those people, they require a lot of time and huge money. Until very recently, there was no comprehensive solution to this dilemma until Elon Musk in 2015 showed up on a stage in the American city of Seattle in front of members of his famous company, SpaceX, to introduce his new project that will control the sky. Starlink. A group of small satellites operated by SpaceX orbiting in low orbit at an altitude between 300 and 600 miles above sea level, which is very low compared to the usual satellites that orbit at an altitude of at least 22,000 miles. Elon Musk, with this project, wants to connect the internet to everywhere. SpaceX estimated that it costs at least $10 billion in 2018, and that it will take up to 10 years for thousands of satellites to be designed, manufactured, and put to their places. Indeed he did. Regarding that, we'll soon unfold the amazing accomplishments of SpaceX in the past few years. However, the highly important thing now is that these achievements brought us to the current moment. The moment wherein China realized the military gigantic capabilities of the Starlink network after monitoring what the project has been doing in Ukraine against the Russian forces. Therefore, Beijing decided to put up its own counter-satellite project, a mysterious project referred to by only 2 letters, GW, or Guowang. It also decided to develop a military plan to answer only one question. How can the Chinese destroy Starlink in case a war breaks out? This situation has produced a current dangerous conflict escalating over a super vital part of the future of Earth. A conflict not only between China and America, but rather a world war, without exaggeration, and this consequently drives us to ask important questions. What is satellite internet? Why did it gain such importance with the advent of Starlink? Why does China deal with it, officially and practically, as a crucial section of its major infrastructure? How did Starlink save Ukraine in the early days of the Russian invasion? Why does China see this network as a threat in the event of invading Taiwan? How will it deal with it? What is Elon Musk's new mystery project directed at governments only? Why is China concerned about it? This is a sample of the interesting questions that we will discuss in today's episode. But before we start, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is significant for the growth of our channel and for us to keep providing the content of the Economic Informant. I'd also like to remind you that all our previous episodes are translated into English, so do not forget to share them with your English-speaking friends and get them to know us. From the early days of the emergence of mobile phones, there was only one dream that dominated the major technology companies, which was to build a communication network and transmit information that could operate anywhere on the planet. Satellite internet itself is not a new invention, and has been in use since the mid-90s. But its satellites are far from Earth in order to cover wider geographical areas, and this means a much lower speed than required, with higher interruption and delay possibilities. That's why this dream will be achieved through the network of small satellites close to Earth. It is a superior technology that is currently owned mainly by America and China. This market, or this space internet market, is also expected to reach, within less than 2 decades, in 2040 in particular, to $412 billion, or nearly $500 billion. This is the size of the cake being fought over now. But let's first illustrate what Starlink is. As we said in the introduction, Starlink is a project for a large group of small satellites, mainly of light weight. It is operated by SpaceX and orbits at very low altitudes around Earth. The weight of each satellite is between 100 to 500 kilograms only, compared to the usual weight of huge satellites, which is 5 or 6 tons per satellite. Starlink uses lasers to transmit signals between them, which makes them need fewer ground stations, plus their rotation at a low altitude allows them to have loose movement. So, providing high-speed internet with less interruptions. The first 60 satellites were launched in May 2019, and they were pretty like a bright peninsula in the sky, as you can see. We will jump wide to reach May 2023, and let us quickly overview the status of the project. The number of Starlink satellites currently in orbit has reached 4,000, providing easy access to the internet in 53 countries. The plan is to reach 12,000. And it is done. SpaceX sent 20,000 free Starlink internet units to Ukrainians. Elon Musk has turned all of Ukraine into a unique and crucial testing ground for his future internet. In the midst of factors that rarely come together, a rare opportunity like this was one of a kind to his project through it. Factors such as power outages, fierce military operations, the destruction caused by it, and Russian electronic jamming of Ukrainian systems confirmed by the Ukrainian generals themselves. Without the Starlink network, Ukraine would have lost the war in its early days immediately. The Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov described the network as decisive and effective. The situation continued in this way until October 2022. At that time, Elon Musk complained about the cost of operating Starlink there, and was about to turn it off if the Ukrainians did not pay. But, after official US pressure, he announced that he would continue to bear the cost of operating Starlink. The situation continued this way until last February, when SpaceX announced the restriction of Ukraine's access to Starlink. Because the Ukrainian army uses the network in military operations such as directing drone attacks on Russian forces. All this takes us to the most important theme of our episode today: China. Before illustrating how the Chinese see the Starlink project as a real American threat to them, we must first talk about China's space ambitions, and why the Pentagon sees China the biggest global threat to it in space. Please give me your full intention for what I am going to see. The truth is that the Chinese space industry is rapidly developing after Beijing opened the way for the private Chinese sector in 2014. Although state-owned companies still dominate this sector, Curcio from Orbital Gateway, a Hong Kong-based consulting firm, says there are currently about 20 commercial or private spacecraft launch companies in China. There are important milestones and landmarks in the journey of the Chinese space industry, such as China being the first country to land a spacecraft on the far side of the moon in 2019. Similarly, it currently owns its own space station, called Tiangong, which was launched in 2021. It also aims to retrieve the first soil samples from Mars in 2030. In all, and in the last 10 years specifically, China has invested heavily in its space program, developed ground missiles and lasers, and increased its space monitoring capabilities. All of this is part of its broader military goals of denying its adversaries access to assets in space, the same American approach in another sense. This is confirmed by the annual assessment of threats for the current year 2023 issued by the U.S. intelligence community 3 months ago in March, which stated that China is steadily advancing towards its goal of becoming a global space leader, to keep pace with or surpass the United States by 2045. However, we will not discuss all the fields of China's space activities but rather focus on the development of the satellite industry there and its relationship with Starlink. In April 2020, satellite internet became an official Chinese national priority when it was listed by the country's largest economic planning agency, the National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC, in the New Infrastructure wish list last December. A report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies said that China was very likely to include satellite communications in its trillion-dollar infrastructure program, the Belt and Road Initiative. It is also marketing it to countries that depend on the Chinese in their digital infrastructure, such as Egypt and Pakistan, and this will give Beijing space to reduce some American influence and make a good number of those countries give up some American services. So, at the end of the same year, 2020, the International Telecommunication Union, a United Nations agency tasked with registering the satellite fleets of all countries, received files from China and specific plans that it would launch approximately 13,000 satellites within the next 10 years at the most. Immediately after that, in April 2021, the government created a company called China Satellite Networks Group Limited, and assigned it to develop the Chinese national project to launch low-orbit satellites and raise the efficiency of the internet, and this led China, by the way, to be the first country currently to test the 6G network. To imagine the situation. This network speed allows you to download 1 terabyte or 1,000 gigabytes in just 1 second. In total, there are currently more than 7 government and private companies in China that build factories and develop infrastructure so that the country can soon produce hundreds of small satellites annually like SpaceX. Among those companies is Beijing Tianbing Technology, a private company trying to develop modern rockets capable of carrying and deploying around 60 satellites in one flight. This is roughly the same payload as the reusable Falcon 9 rocket that SpaceX uses to deploy Starlink satellites, which has contributed to SpaceX's rapid growth thanks to its low costs and large payload capacity. Therefore, last April, the Chinese company took an important step by launching a liquid-fueled rocket for the first time, similar to Falcon rockets. This launch confirms the view of Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX herself, who said that the Chinese's biggest problem is not having advanced rockets, but they will soon have them. Why is this step of crucial significance to the Chinese? Let me tell you, considering the number of satellites launched by China last year, 2022. It is 182 satellites. This seems like a big number for any country all over the world, making China keep being the second space power all over the world. But for its main competitor, the US, this is less than a tenth of the number of new American satellites in the same year only. Why is there a big difference? Because Beijing's ambition to build a satellite internet network faces some obstacles that are not easy, the most important of which is the limited launch capacity. In other words, the Chinese do not yet have a complete rocket company, for example, to serve on a project like SpaceX, which Elon Musk built in more than 20 years from 2002. To make it clear, SpaceX is a very unique model in space firms and all kind of firms in general as it controls the supply chain from A to Z, starting with the technology innovation and design, whether rockets or satellites, etc., passing by manufacturing, launching from its own platforms at last, and ending with maintenance, periodic follow-up, and development. It is difficult for the Chinese to reach that full capacity now or in the near future, and it is difficult for any other country in the world, in fact. The second obstacle facing the Chinese is the technological disparity. There is a wide technical gap between Chinese and American products in finesse, efficiency, quality and effectiveness. The Chinese seek to overcome this in the coming decades. Starlink's ability to provide stable communications and high-speed internet to Ukrainians, despite the Russians' destruction of the telecommunications infrastructure, confirmed that this is the future for the Chinese who need similar fleets of satellites known as constellations. But before we talk about why the Ukrainian model scares China so much, let us quickly clarify that China is not the only one seeking to build its own fleets of satellites. This market, which will reach $500 billion in the coming years, is being fought over by both governments and companies. Of course, the United States is a leader in this market, that is, on the military level. We will find that there is a division in the US Space Force building its own small military satellite fleet. This fleet will join approximately 350 existing US military satellites of various types used to track, monitor and assist US forces around the world. Over the past 10 years, the Pentagon has become dependent on the commercial space sector mainly, and uses SpaceX missiles in particular to deploy secret defense satellites, and that brings us to Elon Musk's new project, Starshield. This is a project announced by SpaceX last December 2022, and it is directed towards the national security purposes of governments. The Chinese fear that it might reveal the secret Chinese military programs, and describe it as if the Americans are installing surveillance cameras all over the world. On the commercial level, it is enough to say that the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, is dealing with a huge demand for satellite launches, and it is currently receiving requests from multiple agencies and companies to launch more than 64,000 new satellites, especially from SpaceX competitors Amazon Kuiper, Viasat, Dish, EchoStar. If we look at Europe, we will find that the European Union is currently building its own fleet as well, such as the German company Rivalry Space Networks, which will launch its own satellites soon. However, the strongest and clearest European fleet was when the French telecommunications company Eutelsat completed an acquisition of the British company OneWeb Global Limited, valued at $3.4 billion, in mid-2022. In order for the company's two fleets of satellites to join with each other and be one fleet with 464 satellites, it will have better and higher chances of competing with Starlink and the Chinese in the future. The actual fear for China, however, remains Starlink. The Chinese currently have two main reasons to be concerned. The first is what would happen if they decided suddenly to invade Taiwan. Starlink would help the Taiwanese regime, as what typically happened with Ukraine. The second is that America, through Starlink in particular, is currently taking over the areas of low Earth orbit from Beijing, whose ambition is to be a huge force in the satellite internet market, not only in the market, but in the area of high-speed data transmission. As for the first fear, it is certain that within the invasion plan there will be cutting of 14 submarine cables for internet transmission. These cables mainly linking Taiwan and its residents and companies to the world and life in general. That is why Taiwan is adding more cables and is planning to defend these cables, but it is also testing Starlink in 700 sites, including sites outside Taiwan itself. China is among the few countries that have the ability to shoot down satellites by hitting them with ballistic missiles, but the problem is that Elon Musk's Starlink network is made up, as we know, of thousands of satellites, so this is an impossible option. Consequently, the Chinese are working on a plan that adopts the soft kill technique of Starlink. What is the meaning of this? That is, instead of hitting using missiles creating a huge amount of debris in low Earth orbit, China is developing lasers that can destroy or disable American satellites, without much chaos, to reach jamming and cyber interference techniques. The Chinese are taking a closer look on the Russians' reports, as a top-secret US intelligence report revealed last April that they are testing a jamming and corruption system directed specifically against Starlink within the Russian electronic warfare systems known as Topol, and this report was leaked as part of the leaks of US intelligence documents in the past weeks. The problem is that the Chinese themselves, until this moment, do not understand a number of the goals of the Starlink network or its full capabilities. Undoubtedly, it is information that only Elon Musk and some SpaceX and Pentagon officials know, and some of the workers on the network itself. The Chinese threat of soft killing is confirmed by General Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations for the US Space Force, who said in a congressional hearing last March that China is currently testing a satellite system that can be weaponized in times of war. He also said previously that Beijing had shown its ability to control and move other satellites. He strictly said that anything we do in space is worthless as long as our information networks are vulnerable to attack. That is why the next package of missiles that will go to the US Space Force will focus on the ability of these missiles to strike and destroy any threat against satellites, and also the Americans will try to make their satellites less susceptible to jamming and immune to laser attacks. But there is a third option for China, as it will often rely on Elon Musk himself to deny Taiwan access to the network in the future, depending on the fact that Musk has great interests in China, on top of which is the huge Tesla factory in Shanghai. On the other hand, the Taiwanese Space Agency is developing its own low-orbit communication satellites, and it is expected that they will launch the first one in 2025. With regard to China's second fear of the Americans' domination of near-Earth space, they are adopting different methods, including the media and official attack, in which they claim that this area will only support 50,000 satellites. In addition to that, Chinese researchers in recent months have been pressuring the government, wherein they shared their concerns in public research and private meetings with military officials that the GW project is too late for Starlink and is needed to be accelerated. But overall, and for a period of not less than 10 years, America will remain superior and will have super dominance over space, thanks to SpaceX, advanced technology, and the unlimited resources of the Americans. I conclude here, and as usual I have a question for you guys. Is there an Arab country that we can see soon joining this space race? Isn't this uphill to see in the near future? I will cope up with all your opinions in the comments. If you want to buy stocks or gold, don't forget to check out Exness. You will find a link under the video below. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you liked the episode, please hit the like button and share the video. The more important thing is to tell your friends and close acquaintances about us. They may like it and get them to know the channel. Goodbye.